Welcome to Flipping the Lid. You've seen the intro, you know what the show is all about. But for our very first episode, since we're going to flip the lid on other people's stories that have shaped their success, their significance, their impact, I figured it seemed only fitting to lead with vulnerability and be as authentic and real as possible by making sure we flip the lid in our own lives first. You see, I'm Brian Bogert, and yes, I'm the speaker, and yes, I'm the coach, but nothing would happen without our team around us. And the most important person in my life in every single capacity is my partner in life who's sitting right next to me, my beautiful wife, Ashley. She's a partner in business. She's the mother to my children. She's probably the best coach and confidant I've ever had. And she's been with me since we even discovered that either one of us were carrying trash from our past. She's been with me and we've been together through so much damage, so much pain in our lives that frankly, we were the only ones that could help get through it together. And so I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to see inside our worlds and see the most important and significant person in my world. And so that's you, my love.
Thank you. I feel the same. Right back at you, babe.
Cool. So as I look back at our journey, it's not one that I would describe as traditional in any way. I think that there are traditional separations of duties that have started to come into our life over the years and how that happened. But outside of that, we've had some paths that put us on great amounts of success. We've had some paths that have hurt and set us back significantly. Yet we always seem to come back to center. How would you describe our journey in life over the last 16 years?
Well, I think that normally I describe it as a bit of a roller coaster, but I think that's just life in general. I think that the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that the saying that life is full of different seasons is extremely correct. And I think that just when you feel like you are having smooth sailing, you've mastered something, change is inevitable. And so I feel like for us, that's basically our journey, just constant change. And I think for a lot of our time together, maybe we resisted that, pushed back on it because both of us very much like to be in control of our world, and change is very difficult for everyone, but our people with our personalities, especially myself, change is hard. So I think during this like kind of next period of life for me, even though you didn't ask, I'm going to tell you, my goal is to really embrace that as the norm. So instead of looking at our life as having some sort of like baseline that we use to judge if we're in a high point or a low point, I think we have to recognize that just every day is part of the journey and see that without judgment and really be able to just take things as they come. Because I feel like the more you and I have been able to do that as individuals, but also as a couple, things feel easier, change feels easier, and it doesn't seem separate from what our goals or what our life is. It's just like, okay, this is the next thing that we're going to move through together.
Yep.
And knowing that we have the ability to do so it really provides peace for me.
On the concept of change, we both have willingly, but also through force and influence, changed significantly as individuals. And I would argue that our relationship and life and dynamic has as well. If you were to look at the most significant or impactful change from your perspective that we've endured, what would that be?
I think becoming parents.
We're still enduring that.
Yeah. And maybe we won't use the word endure. Maybe we'll
embracing, enlightening. Yeah.
A nicer word. But that was a shock to the system of life. However, I think that is really like the epitome of change for the good, change for the necessary. And the person I am today is as much because of our children and you as it is because of who I am at my
Yeah.
core.
You and I had a recent conversation that it still resonates and bounces through my mind. Thank you for the repositioning on endure. I think that what you and I both acknowledged is that like there is no question that being a parent is hands down the most meaningful thing we've ever done. And I would never change it now that I'm in it. I adore our children. I adore who they are, who they're becoming, how they're developing, and what it's forced in you and I, because they're little mirrors of us. All that said, though, I don't think either one of us ever even viewed having children as an option. What was your perspective on that? And how did you enter into marriage, this concept of becoming a mom? And what were the belief systems that you had that shaped us, obviously, on the path that we were on?
Well, to your point that you kind of touched on, I feel like I had almost like an outline for a book or a report or something in my mind when thinking about my future. And there were certain things that I just assumed I would tick off the list. And I've always been, I guess people have described me as being an overachiever
No.
or, older than my actual age. And my mom, I remember, would tell me, like, don't be in such a hurry to grow up. And that really summarizes who I was when I was younger. And I felt like, okay, if I get to these points in my life faster, I guess I felt like it was some sort of race. I don't know who I was racing against, but that it had some meaning
Mm.
with for my life or for my purpose, or I don't know, maybe I was looking for an answer. I think we all, as we get older, it's like you have all these possibilities, but in the back of your mind, you're also thinking, like, what is my purpose? And I think there was this feeling that I wouldn't be able to figure out the answer to
Mm.
that question unless I had checked certain things off of the life list. So I never considered not having kids. I never considered not getting married because I grew up in a pretty traditional family. My
Mhm.
mom stayed home with me when I was little. My dad worked. My parents are both still married. My grandparents, who had a huge influence on me, had a very traditional marriage. My grandmother didn't even have her driver's license, and she went everywhere with my grandpa. So yes, I've evolved from those kind of like archetypes of marriage, but holy crap. You mean I didn't have to get married? I didn't have to have kids?
Yeah.
That realization didn't hit me until I had already done both, which is kind of wild.
Well, that's not, I mean, yes, we've been on a concurrent path for 16 years, but that's no different than the belief systems that I had coming into it. And all the things that we've unpacked as it related to what I was actually chasing, which was a deeper connection with who, but I chased all of what the world taught me to chase: the house, the car, the money, right? And the success that would make me feel significant and make me believe that maybe if I had the significance that people would want to be around me. But the reality is that was so embedded and unconscious, just like marriage, just like kids. It was just that was what was going to happen. And I know that for myself, the removal of expectations is still one of my hardest areas that I trip on my trash. And I know that that's one that you share. So, can you talk about expectations and how those have shifted in your life, our lives, and the lives of our children as we've gotten deeper into really understanding this journey to unpack the trash from our past?
The first example that comes to mind with expectation and struggle is a really simple one, but one I think people can relate to, which is it's the weekend and take away kids, take away pets, whatever. It's just two people, and you each have an idea of how you want that day to go. And I think most of the time people don't communicate about it very clearly, or at least we didn't for a long
We
time.
didn't.
And so you throw in another person, and it's like, well, if you don't communicate, and they're not telepathic, they're not going to know kind of like what your plan hope was for the day, right? And I remember this feeling of like great disappointment sometimes, and not just with you, by the way, in general.
Just typically with
Just
me.
you just were the person who was around at the time, but where the plan and then the action are two different things.
Mm.
And so this feeling of like, well, I thought we were going to do this, this, and this, or maybe we did do what I had planned, but then it didn't turn out the way that I had hoped, or there's some level of disappointment. And I think this is a common theme in my life. This idea of expectation really sets you up for failure because I put a lot of emotion into all of my thoughts. And when emotion is tied to expectation, I mean, 9 times out of 10, there's going to be something that's different, that's unexpected, or that's lacking, or whatever. So I'm on a tangent now, but I just feel like that is so funny because having kids was like the second part after getting married. You realize, okay, I have to, it's not about me. Like I'm not the only one making choices for our life. It's not just my life anymore, it's our life. And then having kiddos that are not neurotypical, you realize we kind of went through this whole period of realizing like, oh, what we thought our life would look like with kids or what we thought their schooling would look like isn't what I had pictured. And so you realize over time, like all these little adjustments that life throws at you, sooner or later you have to take the lesson from that because you're going to keep getting more of the same. And I think my first reaction when I was younger was to really struggle against it, to hold on tighter, to try to control more. And then it just backfires in your face.
I think one of the most prominent expectations that I think you and I both carried was what life would look like through childbirth, through bringing a child home. And we had largely a really easy process. And I say we collectively, you carried the baby, you did the pregnancy. I just tried to support you.
You had to eat all of the burritos with me.
I ate all the burritos with you and I gained the weight and I didn't lose it in the first one. I learned my lesson on the second. But all that said, I think both of us had this vision of a really smooth delivery, of this like connected, joyful time where we were going to really be able to bond with our new development that we'd created in life. And that's not what happened. And it unraveled quite a bit for a while after that. So I felt that as one of our biggest expectations, but I don't want to put words to it. I'd rather you describe it because I think that your experience concretes it so much more solidly than I could ever express.
Well, your first kid's always the wild card because it doesn't matter how much you prepare for being a parent or for the process of giving birth. You don't know what you don't know, and you have to live it to really like understand it, which people said to us. But again, you have no concept of what that actually means. So I felt like I tried to not have a lot of expectations about the birth because I understood that. I think most of my expectations really fell to the after part. Um, but with birth, I mean, we had a crazy journey for both kids. And for the people that don't know, when our son was born, he was born not breathing. His umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck and he had to be resuscitated. Um, and that was terrifying for both of us because, I think we both had the same thought in that moment that we might be leaving without a baby. And that would have been the ultimate, I mean, trauma and change in our journey. But luckily, that wasn't what happened. But there was still trauma and there was still what I think of as like the aftermath that we went through because of the type of birth that we had. And I think no one else in our family, whether to my knowledge, neither of our mothers experienced that
Right.
during birth. Except that I will say, I think my mom did, but we didn't talk about it. She had to have an emergency C-section, and we didn't talk about it because I think there's this perception that if you talk about the scary things that happen during childbirth, you're going to scare the person who's pregnant and you're going to cause more stress. But I'm the type of person who's always wanted more information. And I think that if I had kind of like a better understanding of all of the different outcomes that could have happened or feelings, or I don't know, I just think I could have been better prepared emotionally. But the expectation that you have this child and then they're a piece of you, so there's going to be this, like, angel singing and your heart exploding and just those warm feelings of joy and love. And I just remember feeling like, who is this person? Like, there's this screaming child that is like not happy, doesn't want to eat. And so that was sad. That was really like,
Mhm.
that felt like a loss to me because I didn't have that immediate
Yeah.
connection. So I think that's one of the biggest like myths that,
Yeah.
with our second, I did get to experience that
Mhm.
despite the birth trauma. But I I just think it's so important to know that even from like that very first minute, there's there's no normal. And I think
Mhm.
that's what is so hard because we're made to believe that there is a norm
Yeah.
and there's not. And so whatever your birth experience is, I think going into it with that understanding that there's no right or wrong, there's gonna be like a baby is going to be born,
Mhm.
and knowing that you have to just kind of go with the flow and be flexible
Yeah.
with it.
What I really want to draw out a little bit further, because you talked about the aftermath,
Mhm.
right? And you talked about the lack of connection, but there were some dark times.
Mhm.
It was hard, like really hard. And when it was almost at its darkest, you still didn't even want to admit that there was darkness.
No.
Yeah. And so that took a while. But can you talk about that? Because I think that our journey there is one that took a lot from both of us
Mhm.
to really make sure that we could have enough empathy and compassion to move through something that neither one of us saw coming.
Yeah. I think, people talk a lot about I was prepared for the baby blues. We'll talk about that. And so that was something that was like on my radar. I think
Mhm.
they talked about it in our birthing class. And um but what does that mean? It's like, I don't know, you're going to be sad, right?
Mhm.
And so the question is always like, how sad is sad enough to the point that you're now talking about postpartum depression? And I don't even like the word sad because I like, what is that? I think it's so hard for people to quantify and understand emotions, and so it's different for everyone. But yeah, that feeling, I would summarize it by just like an immense feeling of loss.
Yeah.
I had this feeling that, okay, the birth was a freaking nightmare. That was terrible. The after part sucks. Like,
Yeah.
you're exhausted. I felt this immediate like disconnection with my own body, um, which you could always question. I did not have a natural birth, and I know that that is a huge piece of natural birth to help maintain that connection. But for me, I lost it. I The recovery was so much more
Yes.
uncomfortable and painful than I had expected. And so it's like all of these things I just lost. I felt like I lost myself. I lost my body that I felt like I knew prior to my pregnancy. I felt like I lost you in some ways because I felt this immense separation because I felt like I was so alone, And so I felt it to the extent that didn't really think that anyone else fully understood or would understand. And I also didn't want to admit it because I'm supposed to be this new mom who's
Yeah.
excited about this baby and who's bonding. And I I felt I felt angry. I felt like I'd been
Mhm.
robbed of something. I also kind of was like looking at this child like I can't do anything to appease him.
Mhm.
I remember you with Blake and thinking, gosh, Blake is just he seems like he melts with
Mhm.
daddy and he hates me,
Yeah.
is how I felt. And no, a newborn baby does can't hate anybody, but that's how you
Yeah.
feel in the moment. And so the biggest source of anxiety for me was feeding and sleeping because I felt like I couldn't like breastfeeding was very difficult.
Yeah.
And there had been such an emphasis on breast is
Yeah.
best. And even in the hospital,
So much mom shaming.
there was so much pressure not
Yeah.
to give him formula. And so that was just like devastating to me because I didn't feel like I could do it. And, it just was so, so hard. And I'd be curious to know if you felt like you even realized at the time, like how dark it was for me.
Mm. So my recollection of the time is absolutely I knew how dark, and it scared me a lot. Um, you went into a very dark place, and you didn't want to sit in it, look at it, hear about it, even acknowledge that it existed for a while. And hopefully, I never put pressure on you. I don't honestly remember how those dynamics took place, but I feel like I was in a position where I was trying to give you as much support as I could without knowing how.
Mhm.
Not being able to be in a place where you and I had moved through so much that we've now moved through that, you and I were still in a place at that time where though we were the most connected to each other that we'd ever been, we also felt the need to hide for a lot of reasons from each other. Depression is something that's not new in our lives, our world, certainly not to you. And so I have understood how to navigate different periods where there's more darkness, but this was different. And it was heavy and it was dark and it was scary. And honestly, I think that as I'm talking about it out loud, that might be one of the moments though that really shifted me because I often talk about how I woke up and Blake was 6 months old and I missed it all.
Mhm.
Right? The first week was really all I felt like I had. And I was
Yeah.
active and present at home when I was there. But at the same time, like I was only really showing up and providing financially. And so I think it was the combination of the lack of connection that I was starting to feel and the depth of it that I desired with my son and where that ultimately evolved for you and I. Um, though it took years before I was even more involved to the point like I am now, I would tell you that that was why I sought external help in that time frame
Yeah.
because I didn't it was the first time in my life that I felt stuck to a place that I didn't have the intellect, the emotional resilience, the knowledge or access to the right people in my immediate network that could help me. And so I felt like the best way to help you was to help myself. And though that wasn't the active thought process then, it was how do I show up more intentionally in as many ways as I can so that I can hopefully bridge some of the gap that you experienced. And I think in that time, I probably carried a lot of blame and shame in my own existence for the things that I wasn't doing that I believed I always wanted to do as a father. But honestly, I think given the darkness, it was probably easier to not be. And I don't think I've ever said that to anyone because I don't know that I had that connection until you asked me the question. But I think it was really significant. And I think that period, and then with Addison coming and everything that added onto it, really amplified change in our life in a really big way.
Yeah. So Blake was what, 9 months old, 10 months old?
They're 17 months apart. So yeah, he was 8, I think 8 months old.
So
no, whatever it is.
Yeah. You all can do the math.
5 months old. 5 months old. He was 5 months old because they're 17 months apart. 5 months
Well,
old.
no, because she came a bit early too. And
yeah.
But
so
anyway,
the
point is, I didn't plan on getting pregnant when I did for the second child.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds stupid because we are quite aware of how babies are made.
We just never put the goalie back into play.
Yeah. But it also took us a long time to get pregnant with Blake. So we assumed that it would be the same with the second. So we weren't really worried about it. And then here I am pregnant and we have a baby still. And we were in a smaller house and we were busting at the seams. And so it's like,
in every way, by the way.
Every way. And it's, we didn't plan on moving. But then once we found out we were pregnant, we were like, well, where are we going to fit another kid right now? And so, in a matter of like months, we ended up moving. We were going through a second pregnancy. We were starting to notice some things with Blake and his behavior right around, the time that he was a year old that felt different, but we didn't understand yet.
Yeah.
And so, like, change.
Yeah. A ton. July of 2019. I've talked about this weekend many times that you and I got to go away. And I still look at it as one of the most connected times I think you and I ever experienced, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And in a time that I'm not sure I ever expected the level of connection that we ended up having that weekend. It was great. It was soul healing for both of us.
Yeah.
Go to the conversation.
Have the best birthdays.
Because I have a badass partner who always makes my birthday priority, even though it's not one to me. Go to the conversation in the car. What led you to challenge me to change?
It's funny because you always say that it was the conversation in the car, but I remember it as being a conversation in the pool as where like it first started coming up. And
I was probably just looking at you in your swimsuit.
Probably. Oh, but I hated I hated your old job.
You hated who I was there.
I hated who you were, but I disliked the fact that you felt like you needed to be someone different than who I saw you to be. Mm-hmm. Because the person that I felt like you were, A, wasn't the authentic Brian. B, wasn't really a Brian I thought I would have been interested in to begin with. And C, was not the Brian that was like living his full potential. I've always, like, from the moment I met you, I felt like there was something that I couldn't put my finger on inside of you that was there. And I remember, my friend asking me, like, what's the deal with this guy? Like, because we started dating and things moved really fast. And I'll come back to that weekend in a second. But the point that I'm making is that I said really early on that I was going to marry you, even though I didn't have those feelings of love, like right off, that I was like ready to head to Vegas at that point. But I just knew there was something there. There was something bigger. And I knew that I needed to ride out whatever this was to figure it out. And I feel like that was like the beginning. And then this weekend was a pivotal point because I feel like it was the next step in discovering that. And I think I was just at a point in our life and we were really secure financially. We were, the kids were taken care of. We had some extra hands to help with that. And so it felt like a safe time to talk about, like, maybe this isn't the path that we need to be on. And so, I told you, like, how would you feel if you didn't have to go into the office tomorrow?
Yeah. I've talked about it so often, but I remember just how hard that one question hit me. And then your commentary that followed. was really beautiful. You wanted me to see myself the way you saw me, and I was blind to it at that time. I was blind to it because of the amount of armor that I had protecting myself. I was blind to it because of the trash from my past that truly was just weighing me down and not even allowing me to see things clearly. You describe it very clearly as you are not the person that I always knew you to be. You're the authentic self. Who would you have described me to be in that period of life?
Like the true you or how the outward you?
How did the world perceive me? How did you perceive me in that period of our
Like
life?
obviously high achieving, like balls to the wall, life of the party kind of guy, big personality, which is all true. I would say that people would have still recognized the importance of your family, but I think people would have thought that your career and the path that you were on was like you were going to succeed, and that's like, you were also married to the business, and um, financial success. And I think that nobody would have realized except for the people, the group that knew you as well. Well, not as well, but well enough to know that that wasn't the truth. People would have thought that that was like it, like just another stereotypical, like high achieving, adrenaline junkie, testosterone fueled businessman. No offense to anyone out
I
there.
don't have a competitive bone.
And that was it, like pretty basic. And, the words that I said to you before we had kids, which I feel like I remember clearly. I'd love to hear like your perception of it, but I said, like, I don't ever want to be a single mom. I don't need a husband to be a single mom. I knew that back then. And that's what I said to you and how I felt, because I knew that if I was going to have children, I wanted to have a partner to help me raise them. And I, ironically enough, never thought I'd be a stay at home mom, which is what I was and have been for most of the time that we've had kids. And, but I assumed that we'd both have careers and that we'd both kind of like care for them equally.
Mhm.
And that's not how I felt. That's not what I felt like our reality had melded into. I felt it was very much like you and your business and your career was your life over here. And then our family was kind of something on the side that you did when you weren't at the main place. But I knew that wasn't your heart. That's not what you wanted.
No, it wasn't my heart. I will tell you, I remember you saying that. Absolutely. I don't think that I understood what being a partner really meant. I think that in so many ways, and I said this to you, I think a couple of weeks ago, I feel like so often, so many of the things from my past, the trash from my past, caused me to have more attachment, more connection, and more care for the material things in my life. And I would also even say, especially in contrast to if other people were involved with touching those material things, I had more protection and care for the items than I had for the people. And it kills me to look back and realize that that is true. I was blind to that because that's never been my heart, but that was the path I was on for so long. And I would say that I didn't know what being a partner looked like, and I cared deeply about you. I loved you. And what I didn't think was possible is that by having children, I could love you more. I'm forever indebted to you for the gift that you gave me and our children.
You sure?
Although I
Some
endure
days.
them, truly, like it has been one of the most enlightening, empowering, uplifting experiences of my life. The strength with which you not only brought them both into the world, but continued to advocate for them in such a powerful way is something that's always really motivated. And so what I would tell you is I heard you then. I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't know how to show up any better than I was showing up. And largely because I'm not sure that I really had an effective model for what that looked like. I love and adore my dad, but my dad was the oldest of 5 kids in an abusive household with an alcoholic father. And he took the brunt of that. And he was out early. Um, he didn't have a good relationship with his father, and he didn't have an active and engaged father. And so my dad often was in a position to provide for us financially. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't do my dad justice, because there's way more to him and all the variables, as you know. But in a lot of ways, like, we are patterned based on what we observe and how we see it. And
it's unconscious.
And what I didn't know until way later in life. In fact, we were sitting at the table this last August in a conversation with my parents on the anniversary of the accident. And there was a conversation with my mom and my dad where they had very intentional discussions around where their strengths were. And though my dad was at home and very active for 2 years in our life, that my brother and I still joke about, because he was like the best stay-at-home dad like ever, it was such a blip that it was like this really beautiful, warm memory for all of us. But his job to hold our family together and to do what needed to be done because of the medical needs that were existing in my world and the balance and the challenges that would happen, he didn't have the tool set to deal with that.
Yeah.
He was very good at working. Mm-hmm. He's always been a hard worker. He's incredibly smart, one of the most intelligent, successful people I've ever met, despite the fact that, again, the patterning from his past, he may not always believe that. So I'm grateful for what he did, but if I'm honest, I didn't have a mom. And so for me, providing was that. It was going out and doing these pieces. But that conversation in 2019 led to a whole lot more. It was that prior couple of years that we started to really get active because of Blake's diagnosis with autism.
I gotta pause. I know where you're taking it, but I wanted to say it's really kind of funny, because one of the things we say to Blake all the time is the world's not going to care about your intention. They're going to care about your action and how they're perceiving you.
Correct.
And it's just really funny, because I think that that's something that you've struggled with.
Hugely.
Because, again, like, I've always known your heart. And I think sometimes it's really hard for people to understand, like, well, that's not my intention. Like, I'm this good person. I care about my family. I want to be there. Like, my heart's in the right place. And really, like, there has to be this kind of like moment of reckoning with understanding, like, okay, but how are people outside of myself viewing not just who I am, but my actions? And are my actions supporting the person that I feel I am inside? And so for me, I feel like 2019 was the beginning of this realignment process for you and for us, where it was like, oh, yeah, like, my external life is not in alignment with the person that I feel I am.
Yep.
And you can only say, I'm not that person, so many times, because people aren't going to believe you unless you start living your truth.
Correct. And what's crazy is if you know your heart and your intent and you're putting it into the world, I'm going to take it. You said it in a really lovely way. You said people don't care about what I say to Blake, because I think it's really important, because this is what I experienced, and I know it's how he experiences it. The world is not going to judge you based on your intent. They're going to judge you based on your actions.
Yeah.
That's it. Right? Now, judge doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. Right. It just means that that's what's going to happen. Caring for someone in those places, and that's a really important nuance. Like, you always have a way of making it pretty and like warm, but like, that's the fact. Yeah. I always felt judged. I felt like I had to defend because I knew my heart. And to me, my actions at the time were in alignment because I didn't have the ability to see it otherwise. And I was not paying attention to how often I felt like absolute garbage because my world was not congruent. And so I could say things in the world, believe things in the world, act things in the world. And by the way, I still will always say this. I believe I've always been a great husband, and I believe I've always been a great dad. I've got way better, and I still have a long way I want to go. but I know that I've always done the best I can given the moment based on what I was aware of. And that's what led down this path of really starting to flip open the lid and look inside, because it was that period of time that we started to discover I was dealing with shame at a level that I didn't ever understand. Right? It was impacting actions, behaviors, our business, our interactions, our relationship on such a massive scale in ways that I didn't even see. And so that put us into a 10-month period where we got really clear. We laid a foundation. We started to create a path to go amplify impact through the world. Lots shifted.
Yeah.
Lots changed. But some of these patterns and some of this trash is buried so deep that it trickles far longer than we ever imagined. And so, in our effort to realign our lives, put it back into congruence and alignment, and the courage it took for you to push me to see myself the way you saw me led to a whole bunch of beautiful things. But what's fascinating is I still wasn't living completely congruent. The patterns of work, the patterns of the way that I felt like I was going to recreate success, the way that we were going to rise, the way we were going to create impact, I knew no other way than the only way I've ever done things, which is balls to the walls, all in, no matter what. And I'm not a believer in balance. I'm a believer in integration. However, if you are integrating your life in a way that's not aligned, it will force feelings, emotions, and resistance until you pay attention. Some of the things we talked about earlier. So fast forward to March, April of 2021. So we left the business June 1st of 2020. Now we're March and April of 2021. Where were we? And what did you have to communicate to me then?
Well, something else external had kind of like happened, and it's not fully, I feel like, my story to tell, which is why I
Yep.
allude. But it kind of shook us up a little bit in our relationship. And I know now what the purpose was,
Mm-hmm.
at least for me. The purpose for me was to kind of be like shocked out of my day to day and to really like do soul searching for how I wanted my life to look, my marriage to look. And it led me indirectly to this place of feeling like we have so much in our relationship. We have like such an amazing foundation, but there were situations that would arise from your anger, from my insecurities, and all of our past trash together, and it would combust. And those moments were so deeply painful for me because of my past trash, but also because it didn't, again, feel like moments that should be happening based on who we both know each other to be. And so I felt scared for a long time because these patterns were not something new, but it's like everything kind of like got to this like boiling point, I think. And so, yeah, I mean, it sucks to say it now, like to really like
You haven't even
sit
said it
and
yet. So what
relive.
happened
I
in that
know.
moment?
I literally got so overwhelmed and emotional that I came to you and said, like, I don't know if like our marriage can continue the way that it is. And but I had to get to this point of feeling like I had nothing to lose, or I had so much to lose that I had to lay it on the line because I had to be ready for what you might say, which could be, well, screw you. Like, you're right. I'm done. Or like, what's next?
So, though you communicated that our marriage might not be able to last, that wasn't the part that hit me. clearly the idea of losing the most important person in the world to me and my children, that is my definition of suffering. What really hit me was that as we chase alignment and congruence, we decided that I have a unique passion and gift for helping people see who they are authentically and help them move through those things from their past because of the objectivity and non-judgmental lens and mirror that we can reflect back to them. So largely what led to me leaving the last business was connected around helping individuals get back to the core of who they are, no matter what. I felt like I was chasing that path myself. I was actively doing it and pouring it into the world. But the words you told me that day were that things I did early in our relationship, actions and behaviors that existed still currently, patterns that carried forward in ways that we didn't even know where they came from, had contributed to you losing who you were. And that was like a dagger to the heart.
So funny because for me, the marriage piece was the hardest thing and the most like profound. But it was your partner.
Because I was responsible largely for creating this dynamic that caused you to lose your sense of self. And I broke up with the girlfriend that I had right before you because it was a multiple repeating pattern where I would steamroll my partners and I didn't like who I became in that relationship. And you were one of the first that ever pushed back. And you pushed back a lot, always. and I love that because it's made me better. But that's what really hurt because what you used were different words to tell me the same things you'd been trying to tell me for a decade earlier, but the language never landed. And it's not because you didn't articulate it beautifully. It's for whatever reason I didn't hear it through the right lens. So it went from the beginning of March feeling like we were in the best place in our marriage we'd ever been.
Before all of this.
Before all of this.
Yeah.
And that being true, by the way.
Yeah.
To 6 to 8 weeks later, I'm not sure if we're going to be married for another month. What would you say are the handful of greatest changes that have taken place in our house, in our relationship, with me, and with you as a result of that conversation? And let's start there.
Well, I think you have to start before that with one other piece, which is it's important to understand that the process of losing yourself in a relationship doesn't just happen. Mm-hmm. It happens over time. Mm-hmm. And it starts probably out of self-preservation, but it also can be mixed with thinking that you're just be helping the other person by not vocalizing every concern, feeling, whatever. But what over time happens is that you get so used to silencing yourself, or you feel like being quiet or like walking on eggshells to try not to trigger the other person. It just becomes like the new norm. And then you realize, oh my God, like I'm not saying anything. Like I'm this like shell of a person. And it becomes harder to talk about your feelings in general, because I think when you start walling off pieces of yourself, even if it's in an attempt to reduce conflict, you start walling off the pieces that you should be sharing with your partner. And so there's a lot, there was a lot of feelings, I think, on your side that I had pulled back and really wasn't being a partner either. And for me, I realized that that's because it was all self-protection by that point. So we had to change basically, a decade of patterning. And so I mean, it's been hard. It's been really hard. I think the first thing that we had to build again was trust. And which is so funny because trust comes in so many different ways. And you always, no matter what was happening in our marriage, like you were the person that I would trust to have my back, to
Mhm.
protect me, to be my person. But you weren't the person that I felt like I could trust with my feelings or with my soul. And so we had to build that back up, and we had to work on being intimate with each other, not having sex, but really like what that means. Like, what does it mean to care for somebody?
Mhm.
And I don't think we had ever had those conversations like, what makes you feel cared for? And those are conversations that we've had more than once now,
Yep.
and that I think you have to continue having with your partner because in certain times it's going to look different. And so once the trust kind of was built up again, and that happens by showing that you can stop in a moment when you're dealing with, in your case it was anger or some elements of control, and that trust got built up again by me being able to say to you, I'm feeling like your energies, heightened, and I feel like maybe this is headed in a bad direction, or I don't like how you just spoke to me, or whatever. My feelings are hurt from this interaction. And you being able to receive that without pointing the blame back to me, and us being able to have like a conversation about it, that over time, like enough of that happening, you realize, okay, like we're making progress. We're changing this pattern that existed that caused
Yeah.
so much pain. And in doing so, we also spent a lot of time talking about where did it come from?
Mhm.
Because it didn't just, you're not an angry person. And what people, I think, fail to realize in relationships is that it's not always just about the two of you, it's also about all of the generations that have,
Yep.
you know, lived before you, that have helped pattern some of these ways of viewing the world and of viewing yourself,
Yep.
and the limits that we put on ourselves as well that change how we perform our self talk, how we think about ourselves, how we present ourselves even to our partners. And I think what I realized is like I have been armored almost our entire relationship in one way or another because I was scared of being hurt and of being giving all of myself to you and having you be angry or whatever and just feel, deflated and that sense of loss again.
There was a time that I didn't see your strength. I've always known the strength that you have, but when I realized how strong and big my personality is and how effectively I can infuse life into people, flipped the other direction. It takes unbelievable versatility and strength to endure the size of my energy coming down. And so I know that I was burying you in my trash. And I'm grateful for the honesty, the vulnerability, the authenticity, and the fact that through all of that, I do think that our constant has been we've always had this very strong core connection and belief in who each other were, regardless of what was existing. And so you are largely responsible for holding me accountable to becoming who I'm capable of becoming, who I really am, but was hidden behind all the
You know what made that easier for me though? Is your desire to grow, to be better, to change. Like I feel like that's always been in you.
trash. Mhm.
I mean, I described myself as an overachiever, but you are like have always in my mind been like the ultimate overachiever. And that has shifted, what your goal is with that. But I feel like that's what you want. Like I never questioned, I didn't feel like I was trying to change you or make you into somebody that you weren't. Like you are who you are. That core has never changed. So just you needed to feel like, I think somebody saw it and would fight alongside you so that it could be realized.
By the way, is what everybody wants. And it seems so hard to get there, but it's so worth the journey. We're going to wrap up this conversation in a minute, and I know I'm going to have you back. I just love talking with you in this format. um, but what I would be really curious about is what is the craziest thing that you want to still do, accomplish, be, or experience in your life?
The craziest?
The craziest, biggest, most amplified, like what does that look like for you?
That's something I'm still working on because it's really hard for me to think big for myself. I think I limit myself a lot. But my friends who know me will laugh at this because I've talked about it before. My dream, my crazy vision is to one day have like this field of chihuahuas like running towards me with their funny little gallop run. And when I say like a field, I probably mean like 10 plus, but a minimum of 10. And I think that would happen on some type of like animal sanctuary
Yeah,
that I would
it
love
wouldn't happen at
to
our
own.
house.
No.
It won't be at our house.
Although I have like right now with our foster, I get like 3 little chihuahuas, and it feels like a glimpse of that dream. But I think I realized my passion and love for animals is something that fills me in a way that's different from
Yeah.
anything else in my life, and I want more of that.
If there was one thing that you could look back on in our lives and change, what would that be?
Our wedding.
You'd go big?
No,
No?
I wouldn't go big. I would give myself permission to have more fun
Mm,
and to not worry about like anything other than you and I.
that's really beautiful, by the way. I think that's something we're trying to do in our lives right now in
Yeah.
everything is just to try to have more fun in everything we do. So, and I agree with that. I think our wedding was a stressful period and day. Again, largely because I think of the expectations that we placed on it.
Which is funny because we both felt like we were doing it in a way that
Would minimize.
minimize those expectations.
Yeah, totally. All right.
And I would have had a stripper at my bachelorette party. I'm just kidding.
I love it. If there's something that you're aware of in this current moment that you wish to evolve and change within yourself to allow you to get closer and closer to who you are and who you're becoming, what would that be?
I think I have found that I kind of like hit a stride when I'm able to be vulnerable with people. And I think, funny enough, that it's easier for me to be vulnerable with people I don't know well than it is for me to be vulnerable still with you. And I think that this is something
Hmm.
that I've like really enjoyed though, as you and I have worked on our marriage. And I love like those moments when I'm able to just like take a deep breath and let it out and like sink into you. I want to allow myself to have more of that. And I think what that actually is me saying is that I want to allow myself to have more time for what I need. And I get emotional talking about it because I think that I have a lot of shame tied to like
Mhm.
doing things for myself.
You do.
And I move really fast throughout my day so that I don't have to do anything for myself because that takes time and effort and emotion. So I want to find those little moments every day
Mhm.
where I can be vulnerable with my partner, but also be vulnerable with myself.
Beautiful. Is there anything you want to ask me before we wrap this show on Flipping the Lid?
I have so many sarcastic things that
Just let it
come
roll.
to mind, but how do I narrow it down to just one?
You can have two. or 3. What do you want?
Okay, if there was a Halloween costume that I ever like made you dress up in, what would be like the worst thing that I could ever require you to wear?
I don't want to answer that because you're going to make it a reality.
I promise.
Sure, we have a themed costume in this next year, and I'm going to live in it. I have
Or maybe the other should be, what's the worst thing I've ever made you wear? Because I can think of a few that have probably been pretty terrible.
none that register, to be perfectly honest.
The
I feel like I'm kind of
costume
game.
comes to mind.
Yeah, but that one was super special. Like I was really sweaty inside that Easter bunny, but it was at this a place called Ryan House, which is respite care for kids, and I will tell you that whole experience. It was miserably hot and sweaty in that experience. Like anybody who ever wears those full blown costumes, mad respect to you because it is not easy.
You had to keep taking breaks, like, and go into.
Oh, I was literally
you had to
overheating.
take the.
I was like overheating. She's like waving me down. But what made that worth it is those little tiny kids in wheelchairs or walkers who just lit up seeing the Easter Bunny. And that pure, raw awe, like desire and connection, that might be one of the best experiences you've had me do, even though it was miserable, like in the suit, is it's impossible to deny like the pure joy that you witness when kids see the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Or like it's just magical. And I can't say, as a dad, I get my daughter and my son that give me looks similar to that in moments, but it's just different. And to not be myself and to receive like such a magical gaze and to see literally like these little kids scurrying over with these tiny little walkers, it like melted my heart. So I don't know that I have a bad one because me, like I kind of have no shame in those ways. Like
Yeah.
I just make a jackass of myself most days. And so I'm okay playing characters and like having fun. So
What's
anyway.
your least favorite household like chore?
Um, cleaning the bathrooms.
That's mine too. It's gross.
I don't know why. I just have never liked it. But I like taking out the trash because I've seen the importance in that. And the more we take out the trash rather than consistently in our house, the more it happens inside of us. And so
You're good at both.
I am good at both. So I'm grateful for you being so willing to come on to this show as our very first guest. I'm grateful for who you are in my life, and I love you to pieces.
I'm grateful for you like thinking so much of me as your wife and partner that you would even ask me to be a guest. So
You're my number one, babe. So until next time, when we get to flip the lid on more significant, successful people creating impact in the world, I just want to remind you your stories shape you. The lessons that you can extract and bring into your awareness are those things that you are empowered to use intentionally to make the change you desire in your life. Though expectations and targets can seem distant or like they don't come to reality, the only constant is change, and the only constant in all of our desires, the deepest connection possible, not only with ourselves, but with each other. And when we realize the trash from our past, the trash from your past is the singular thing that's keeping you from being seen and understood and from connecting at the deepest level, there's no greater gift than to be able to scan your can regularly and consistently moving forward. So thanks for tuning in. And all of everything will be down in show notes that will help you understand how to move in and through our world in any way we can create impact for you. We're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by eliminating and removing the suffering that exists on this planet, over 90% of which I believe internal, caused by the trash from our past. Time for us to have a collective trash day and start supporting each other, taking it out even more regularly. I guess we're going to high five and we'll kiss when we shut off the screen so that you don't have to endure that. Anyway, thank you, my dear. I love you.
love you.
And we'll see you soon.